Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Discover New Music podcast from us at Full Pelt Music. Shortly, we'll be joined by Hannah Rose Platt, who we recently featured over on our Discover New Music playlist on Spotify with her single The Mermaid and the Sailor. But before then, the usual reminders from myself. If you would, please do follow Full Pelt on social media. We're on Facebook at Full Pelt and on Twitter and Instagram at Full Pelt Music. And finally, if you would, please do hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. Welcome, Hannah Rose Platt, to the Full Pelt Music Discover New Music podcast. Absolutely delighted to have you on. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you, and thanks so much for having me on. It's just really lovely to have the opportunity to talk about things. So appreciate it.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot to talk about because it's an exciting time in your career. And yeah, we're really excited to talk to you about obviously The Mermaid and the Sailor, which we featured over on the Discover New Music playlist. Your debut album on a sort of major label, well, independent label, that this come out. And yeah, a lot to talk about, which we will all get to. But we always start off the podcast with the same segment. It's called the origin story. So usually, I'm talking to a band quite often. So obviously, there's a bit of a story around how the band came together. I've interviewed a number of solo musicians, and it's always an interesting sort of theme to start off on, the origin story, because of course, for an individual, that we could get quite deep on that. But what is the kind of origin story for you as a musician? How did you arrive at this point in your career?
Wow, a few twists and turns, I think. But when I was little, I was obsessed before music. Really, actually, no, they were two separate things. I was sort of singing songs before I could speak properly. Like in this little piece of very cringy video of me somewhere where my mum's obviously taught me all these songs and sort of singing like Suzanne Vega and Stevie Nicks, so The Cult, as well as Whitney.
Yes.
And Kylie. And then I was always obsessed with stories, and I used to write like crazy stories and poems when I was really little, like 4 or 5. And I just sort of carried on doing these two things separately. And it wasn't until I was about 14, 15, and this amazing youth worker came to my school in Liverpool. Her name's Caroline Murphy. And she looked at me playing guitar and singing. She was just like, "Why aren't you writing your own songs?" Like, just literally as straight up as that. And I was like, "I don't know." And she said, "I've got a gig for you. If you want to write an original song, you can play this gig, but it has to be original. You're not allowed to come and play cover." So I felt like this was, a real good reason to get something written, because I'd be playing with other adults at a real venue. And I wrote a song for that and sort of never looked back really, and was just like, why did it take me this long to put these two hands together? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear, and obviously, there's some great people doing some great work out there, youth workers, and motivating and fostering the talent that's kind of out there. And obviously, that prompt that you got, and like you say, is kind of question, well, why aren't I doing this? Yeah, and there's no reason, and we're certainly glad you did start doing it, because obviously. As I say, we've really enjoyed The Mermaid and the Sailor, and listeners can check that out over on the accompanying playlist and listen to it on there. And of course, across all of streaming websites as well. They can pick that up and listen to it. We always ask about the song we featured on the playlist. So obviously, it's quite a spectacular piece of art, this song. So what can you tell us about the concept behind the song and how it came together for you?
Right, so like you'll have to stop me if I ramble, because I could literally
ramble away.
The rest of the day. But when I was making the whole record in its entirety, there was a few different sort of strands of research. I'm a huge nerd, basically. There was a few different strands of research I was looking into. One of them was sort of horror, the supernatural, the different sort of feelings that like ghosts and the macabre can actually evoke, because it's not always fear. It's sometimes sadness, it's sometimes comfort, it's sometimes very sinister. Like, so that kind of intrigued me. And while I was researching that, I found this other piece of research in a book called The Ghost. And are you familiar with Samuel Pepys? He wrote
vaguely, yeah.
Diary of Samuel Pepys. So he sort of was around in the 1600s and documented the Great Fire of London. So he also used to go around the taverns, in the Elizabethan taverns, and collect the ballads that the balladeers would sing. And him obviously being another huge nerd, collected these songs and categorized them into these 10 categories. And the interesting thing about each category, no matter what it was, a ghost was featured somewhere, even in the good humor category, even in the love category, even there was a category called murder and marriage, which I thought was quite funny that those two things were together. And there was a C category. The category was C and gallantry. And I was like, oh, hello. Like, what more motivation do I need to write a little sort of C song? So I used those 10 categories as like a loose framework for the record, really, to try and give it a bit of light and shade and not all dark, disturbing things. And I just started listening to all these, different sea shanties. I chatted to Ed, the producer, and he gave me this compilation called Rogues Gallery. Check it out. It's on. You can get it on the streaming platforms, and I think it was for Pirates of the Caribbean, one of those films. And it's basically artists like Nick Cave and Sting and Loudon Wainwright doing sea shanties, like modern sea shanties. So kind of immersion in that. And I just sort of literally read it really fast. It was one of the fastest ones. I was like, oh, I want to do a bit more of a haunting sailor's lament than the raucous sort of sea shanty. And I thought, mermaids. I've always been fascinated with mermaids and the sinister side of the mermaid. And I thought it was a really good metaphor for addiction, like that siren call pulling the sailor back into the water. And it sort of wrote itself. It was quite spooky, actually. I went for a walk and then sat down, and then within 20 minutes.
Yeah, you often find the best songs do that. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, fascinating, and that connection that you talked about with addiction, and obviously how it translates across like that. Listening to and reading about the song in advance of the interview, I found that absolutely fascinating, and yeah, very, very true. And obviously you've touched on Ed Harcourt. Obviously you worked with on the song. What was it like working with Ed?
Oh, it was brilliant. It was just the way I've described it a few times, and this is the best way I can describe it. It's like, when you're watching TV and you have the color saturation whacked up. It was like the color saturation was off, like on Life for like a week. Like like every sense was heightened. Like he's a really good cook as well, so we like
okay.
Cook, as all we were saying. So even like the flavors of food even tasted more intense. He's just so instinctive and just so talented. And the thing that struck me about Ed, when I knew he was the right person to work with, when I suggested, he was asking me what other song ideas I had, and I told him I wanted to do a comedy cannibal Christmas song, and he laughed his head off instead of being like disturbed by me. And I thought, yeah, this is the right person to work with. So we just had a lot of fun, really. It was really playful experience, and he's got this really cool studio full of weird things to make noise with. And it was almost like being back at primary school, like, what shall we use now? What does this sound like? What does this sound like? So it was a whirlwind, a really fun one.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Immensely talented individual. That I think people would be surprised what he's been involved in over his career. It's one of them names that's always out there, but perhaps doesn't get the credit he quite deserves.
I wholeheartedly agree. I don't understand why he's not like Paul McCartney level of famous. I just don't get it.
Exactly. It is funny how things work out. And The Mermaid and the Sailor, obviously, this is a spectacular, again, piece of art that obviously you should be so proud of. And there's obviously sort of led with the album coming out, one of the feature singles on it. Listeners definitely need to check it out. They should also check out, there is a video for it over on YouTube, an animated video actually, which I just wanted to touch on because I always like to highlight the videos. I always think music videos are a bit of a lost art. You don't sit and watch music TV anymore, but of course, we have YouTube and they're on demand, so listeners should go and look. And I just wanted to see, where the concept for that video come from. I mean, obviously, it ties in with the theme of the song. But at what point did you decide, we're going to go the animated route, for example?
To be honest, it was so. As soon as I had the album recorded, I just wanted animate the animated tales sort of thing, because all the songs are so different. I was like, what fun that would be to sort of translate that now into the visual side of things. And also, I don't like being on camera, so like it's a win-win for me not having to be like in the video. But it was a deliberate choice, really, just to see what kind of life the different sort of artists could bring into the these little stories and things. So in an ideal world, I would have loved to have had like every single one animated and done a whole visual album, but
Yeah.
it wasn't to be. But we got 4. We got 4 out of 10. Sorry, no, 4 out of 13. 12, 13.
Yeah.
And I just put a shout out online, really looking for animators. And there's also a really cool website called Creative Commissions. Actually, if anyone's interested who's listening, it's looking for artists for things, just Creative Commissions, give that a Google. And you can set a brief and you can talk about what kind of thing you want. And then you have the artists apply, send you their show reels and things. But I actually met Jason Forward, who animated Mermaid and Sailor, through Facebook. It's just a mutual friend.
Yeah.
Chatted a little bit about the concept, and he really wanted to go like full on Mermaid Sailor traditional route. And I was like, yeah, whatever you're seeing, you know, whatever it's sparking, just go for it. But you know, I didn't know what to expect because this is a whole different world. It's like sorcery to me, this stuff.
Yeah.
So I was just gobsmacked when he sent through the final version. It's just, I don't really know what I was expecting, but this just, you know, surpassed any expectation I had.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And there's so many artistic individuals out there that they can do this sort of thing. Like you say, it's a bit like witchcraft to me. I struggle with anything like that. But obviously it works really, really well, fits the song really well, and listeners definitely need to head along, check it out. There'll be links in the bio for this episode that they can get there and do that from. And something else that everyone listening needs to check out, obviously, then is your new album, Deathbed Confessions. So it's come out about a week ago now, I believe, as we talked last week. Yeah. So obviously, with the Discover New Music podcast, and we do hope that people will perhaps check this out that aren't too familiar with the artist that they're listening to. So how would you describe this album to someone completely afresh that's not heard you before? How would you describe the album to them?
Okay, good question. I'll have to try and keep this short. I would describe it as a sonic anthology series. So if anyone's a fan of anthology series like Inside Number 9 or The Twilight Zone, anything a little bit unusual, but each episode is its own standalone thing, its own tale, its own story. What I've tried to do is create a concept album version of that, like the older version of that. And the songs are linked through, themes of death and regret, mistakes, poor choices, but also like uplifting things, like reuniting after death, ghosts as comfort, ghosts as warnings. There's a bit of dark humor in there as well. And in my mind, these characters are all on a train carriage to the beyond. I'll tell you where I first got the idea from. It was a newspaper article called London's Real Ghost Trains. And it was this article about a really mundane thing that happens where a train just has to go from St Pancras and no one really knows about it because they need to keep a certain part of the track open.
Yeah.
The journalist described it in such a way, it was like the shadowy corner of St Pancras station. I had to battle with the ticket inspector to get on a ticket. They were like, no trains from here, sir, no trains from here. And I was like, oh, this is just right in itself. This is just a gift. And I'd like to turn it into something bigger. I'm writing a few little short stories to go with it to sort of expand my knowledge. I've totally gone off on a tangent. You were asking
so good.
What I would hope the listener will feel is held up the story time, like when we were kids. You can listen to the songs individually. They're all separate stories, so they'll make sense. But it has been designed to be listened to in full. So if you can spare a whole 45 minutes, just whack on the earphones and just try and get lost in it. There are little Easter eggs there.
Definitely, and listeners should. I mean, 45 minutes is no time realistically, but everyone's attention spans seem to be shortening, and especially when it comes to music. So I mean, it did intrigue me. Obviously, like you don't see many concept albums these days. I think because of that reason. I think a lot of artists sort of shy away from that because they want to target that short, like 3-minute single type song and just pack a few of them onto an album. So it's quite brave to an extent to do that on your part. Obviously a conscious thing, because you can hear the planning that went into it. But listeners, you really do need to obviously just listen to the whole thing. I have, and obviously, it works as a concept, but what, as you highlighted, it also works in that you can just pick the songs out. So I think that is a key to, you know, making it a success these days, to do an album such as that. And obviously, next question down for me feeds into that. Really, it's sort of the reaction to the album. So obviously, not to make myself sound older, because I always term it in the olden days. You have to used to wait, obviously, for the magazines to come out with the reviews in. Obviously, maybe talk to fans at shows. With social media, the reaction to anything you put out as an artist is just instantaneous now. You get that feedback, as it were. So how have you found the reaction to, obviously, you know, the single and the album since they've come out?
Really, really positive. Actually, I've been blown away and relieved as well, because you never know how these things are going to be.
No.
And this really is an insight into my like mad, twisted little brain. So, you know, you never know how well that's going to go down. But people seem to be really sort of understanding what I'm trying to do, which is just lovely, really. And it's nice. It's nice for me to sort of let that, because I've been obsessed with, I don't know where it comes from. I've been obsessed with sort of the macabre and Victorian Gothic and things ever since being a kid. And it's nice to let that side out, and I'm finding my little sort of tribe of dark hearts, I think, that are that are resonating with it, which is lovely. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's interesting you say, obviously, finding your tribe as well, because you've signed for this album with Extra Mile Recordings, and I've spoken to I think most people signed to Extra Mile over the last couple of years on this podcast, and I've never heard a bad word said about the company at all. Obviously, the support they give their artists is second to none, and it is a family or a tribe, as it were, from what I can see. So, what has your experience been of working with them?
Oh, it's just been like night and day since I'm with them. It's just been just delightful. It really feels like a family. I feel it, and the other artists were all just really supportive of each other, and you know, holding up each other's work. And everyone's so different. It doesn't feel like there's any sort of competition. Everyone's just helping each other out, and they're just really fair. They're really on it, and really supportive. I remember when I first signed, and Anthea, lovely Anthea, I don't know if you've met Anthea, called me up and she's like, "Oh, we're just calling you up to ask you, what colour do you want your vinyl to be?" And I was just like, "You talking to me?" What? That's like the best question.
Yeah.
I know it's just gonna be asked ever. Like, what's the catch? What colour do I want my vinyl to be? Oh my god. So they really invest heavily in a beautiful product, and I think they're of that, you know, again, don't want to say old school, but old school way of thinking of the physical product, you know, something really special to hold in your hands and pay proper attention to. So they really understand that, and it's just been a whole world's been opened up. A lovely one.
Yeah, and it does feel like a bit of you know, I don't know, you think of things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and all this kind of it's almost like the Extra Mile Recordings universe and all the artists that float around that. And as you say, yeah, there's some quite polar opposite kind of artists in there. And I actually caught you live recently supporting Pet Needs.
Yeah, Pet Needs. Was
which,
that Colchester?
That was in Colchester, yeah. So obviously Pet Needs are probably one of the noisiest bands on the label at the moment. And then obviously you've got your sort of more mellower, you know, beautiful music on almost the opposite end of that. But you know, the audience at that show sort of bought fully into both, even though it was kind of a punk gig. Like they just accept, and obviously, you know, it's like, oh no, fresh blood, you know.
Totally. And yeah, that's another thing. Actually, the Extra Mile audiences are just lovely. They're the most welcoming one people, and I think this is sometimes we can forget. And I can forget, because I remember the very first gig I did was before I signed to the label. I was brought in to support Frank Turner at the Gathering in Gloucester a couple of years ago with a few of the people. Pet Needs were playing acoustic, if you can imagine that. They were great. And I remember thinking, oh, this is amazing, but like, what are you doing? Is it too different? And obviously, you know, it went down really well. And I was like, oh yeah, people like different kinds of music.
Yeah,
of course they do. Like I do. So, like, it's kind of a really nice thing to have a show that offers you more than, you know, just the punk
definitely
aspect or just another aspect. You know, it's more of an event, really. Yes.
Yeah, no, definitely. If everyone sounded the same, the music would just be boring, wouldn't it? And I'm guessing that show was one of the coming out of the pandemic, one of the socially distanced type shows. I mean, obviously playing that show must have been quite daunting for you in many different ways. You know, what are your memories of playing that show then?
It was just, again, fantastic, delightful, loved it. Everyone we met was just lovely. But it was the we played 2 dates, and I think consecutive days, and the second one was the day before all restrictions were released. So it was just so weird. So everyone was trying to keep apart, and it was great. The organisers did an amazing job. It was outdoors, and everyone had their own area. It was kind of nice, really. Everyone had their own little area.
Yeah.
Picnic areas. And then I remember it was one of the hottest days. My guitar was feeling it's like Salvador Dali, like melty. But it was just so much fun. It was just brilliant, and the atmosphere was one I wanted to be part of, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I went along the same run of shows that Frank did. I went to the Nottingham version of that, and obviously, it was the first live music for for all of us for months and months on end. And you kind of had that fear: are we ever going to see live music again? So it was very emotional, and to be fair, I loved having my own little area. I almost wish that you could do that now.
You could choose either. Do you want in the mosh pit, or do you want your own little square?
Yeah, definitely. No, they were fantastic. And talking, it's good that we've moved on to the live side, because that's my next point to raise as well. Obviously, you've got a big date on the horizon, June 3rd, at the Camden Club in London, the album launch show. You've got Just Guys supporting, who we've had on the podcast as well, obviously, and another great Extra Mile family kind of artist. So I guess you're really looking forward to the show in general, but also I guess this is one of the first proper opportunities to play these songs since they've been released to an audience. You must be excited about that as well.
Yeah, really excited. It's going to be really special. We're throwing everything at it. We've got theremin playing. He's not actually playing the theremin. I need to stop. He's a theremin player, but he's actually playing an instrument called the Ond Martenau, which is very similar, spooky, haunting sound. And we've got the full band, which is going to be great. Little interludes, a few surprises up our sleeves, and we're playing it in sequence as well.
Oh wow! Yeah,
I can't wait. I played a couple of them live. I've given a couple of the tastings.
Yeah.
Not like this. So it's going to be great. I'm excited about that.
Oh yeah, no, I love the album in full in sequence. That is going to be very special, and obviously, listeners, if you can, obviously try and pick up a ticket and go along to that show. But I'm also assuming that I know I saw one on the list that I was like, oh yeah, I'm at that. I'm going to try and catch Hannah at that. 2000 Trees in the Summer you're playing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's going to be other opportunities for listeners to pop along to a show as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to think of which ones are in. A few have come in today, so I'm trying to keep track of what's announced. What's not announced. But yeah, there's 2000 Trees, which is going to be amazing. We've got a big one at Gloucester Guildhall that was just announced.
Yes.
Skinny Lister, that's I love Skinny Lister. So that's going to be a lovely family affair, Extra Mile family affair on July 30th. Then there's a festival in Hassocks that's just been announced. That's on the 27th of August. But yeah, quite a few summer festivals. Everything could be on the website listed.
Yeah.
And then we're hopefully going to do an autumn tour. I think we'd be silly not to tie in Halloween season with some of the themes on the album. It'd be a bit of a missed opportunity there. So yeah, so look out for some headline shows.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Yeah, that sounds excellent. So yeah, listeners, definitely. Obviously, you mentioned your website, plus across social media will be a good place to keep connected. So listeners can do that on Instagram and Facebook at Hannah Rose Platt Official, and on Twitter at Hannah Rose Platt. So obviously, yeah, definitely recommend listeners go and check that one, and obviously follow the social channels, as it were, and catch a show if you can, for sure. So interesting. Obviously, you talked about you're going to be playing the album in full at the album launch show, which to me makes a lot of sense. But the last theme or subject that we always have on the podcast is a little segment we called Setlist Science. So you mentioned that you're a geek. I'm a geek. I love set lists. So I can really tell the artists that put a bit of effort in, and again, yeah, an album launch show, you really should be playing the bulk of, if not the whole album, and to do it from front to back is fantastic. But in general, you're not going to do that at most shows, are you? That's obviously a special show. So the question for this segment is, how much importance do you place into the structure of a set list, and have you got any rules that you tend to follow?
I'm a bit of a contradiction because I I like to craft it, but I also don't like to craft it too much. I know that sounds really wanky. But I think it's important. It's really important to sort of take your audience on a journey. You know, they pay good money to be out there and seeing you, and especially if you have a longer set. You know, if you're doing a support set, the pressure's a bit much. It's a bit, you know, bit less, and you can just start, you know, the ones that you know everyone's gonna love, and just like hit them with, you know, all the high energy ones. And but even then, I often sort of turn it upside down, and I may finish on something like soft and quiet. I think it's interesting to play with what they might be expecting, and just make sure you're I was gonna say playing with emotions, but that sounds horrible. But you know, yeah, taking the audience on a journey and making sure the energy is shifting, and they feel like they've seen something and they've felt something by the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah, always important. Yeah, to leave them feeling that, you know, you have seen something, and therefore I want to see it again. Definitely. No, I do love that. And the last little question that I've started to add into this one, because we've had a few conversations on the podcast around it. I'm trying to simplify it to encores, yes or no?
Oh, yes, but maybe without the pantomime on-off peekaboo thing.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I'm Northern as well. Like, it just feels, I don't know what that's got to do. It just feels a bit like, oh, get, you know, come on now. Just like, we're going to play some more songs. We all know we're going to play some more songs. I don't know, maybe, so yes, in terms of the volume of songs, but maybe not the peekaboo bit.
Yeah, there was that meme that went around recently, wasn't there, saying the encores are basically peekaboo for grown-ups. And yeah, that I totally get it. I think done right, then they work really, really well, and it's a fantastic thing. But yeah, sometimes it just feels cringeworthy, doesn't it? So
well, you got to have something up your sleeve, haven't you? If you're going to walk on and come back on, you got to kind of bring on someone else with you, or, you know, like, you know, we can't all be Paul McCartney bringing on Dave Grohl and Bruce Springsteen, but like something like that.
yeah, if only. Yeah, definitely. No, absolutely been a real pleasure talking with you, Hannah. Obviously, listeners definitely need to follow you across social media to stay up to date. Check the album out, stream it, but if you can, buy a physical copy. What colour vinyl did we go for in the end?
It's gold. It's beautiful. It is a thing of beauty, this one. And again, Extra Mile have gone all out. It's a gorgeous gatefold sleeve, and there's illustrations and photos of me dressed as a character from each of the stories, which was a very fun photo shoot. So yeah, it's worth getting your hands on a physical copy if that's your thing.
Yeah, definitely encourage listeners to do that. I always like to throw just the last message back to obviously the guest. So what would be your last message for the listeners today?
Oh, don't be frightened of the dark. There's some beauty in there.
Beautiful, deep final message. Quite often we just get buy the album, so no, that is fantastic. Thank you so much, obviously, for joining us on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I really do hope you enjoyed that chat there with Hannah Rose Platt. Do make sure you check out her single The Mermaid and the Sailor over on our Discover New Music playlist on Spotify, and of course do follow Hannah across all of social media to stay up to date with everything coming from her. You can also follow Full Pelt on social media. We're on Facebook at Full Pelt, and on Twitter and Instagram at Full Pelt Music. And finally, if you would, please do hit that like button, hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening, because we'll be back very soon with another episode of the Discover New Music podcast.